Joseph's call, when the unexpected happened. Joseph's family heritage is that of being God's people. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob's favorite son was Joseph, and Jacob made it very clear. He had 12 sons. Joseph was the next to the youngest, and he was definitely Jacob's favorite. And Jacob did not hide that from the brothers. The brothers, seeing and knowing that Joseph was Jacob's favorite son, and he showed favoritism towards him, and then to add to that, Joseph had a couple of dreams earlier in his life, which depicted his brothers and ultimately his parents bowing before him. This enraged the brothers. They had such hatred towards him that one day when he came to see them in the field, as their father had asked him to come and do, that they decided to throw him in a pit. And after they had him in a pit for a while, this caravan comes by going into Egypt. So then they sold him to this caravan, knowing that they would take Joseph into Egypt and he would be sold into slavery. And Joseph was the first one of his parents and siblings to actually go into Egypt at this time during their family history. Once he was in Egypt, he walked into more betrayals. He worked for a master that he had control, and he was in charge of his whole house. And he was wrongly accused of approaching his master's wife in a way that's inappropriate. So he was put into jail, and he was in prison. But the favor of God was always on Joseph. In his master's home, he was made second to his master. When he was in jail, the jailers put him over the affairs of the things that went on with those who were in jail. At one point, Joseph interprets a couple of dreams of a couple of men, and the one that was to be left to live, that Pharaoh would let live, he asked, "Please remember me when you go before Pharaoh." Well, for 2 years, he was left in the prison, and the gentleman did not remember him before Pharaoh and speak of him before Pharaoh, until one day when no one could interpret Pharaoh's dreams. Then the turnaround happens for Joseph. He's brought before Pharaoh, and he's asked to interpret these 2 dreams that Pharaoh had. God gives him the interpretation, but God also gives him a 14-year strategy to preserve Egypt and eventually Joseph's own family. At this point in this scenario of events that happened, Joseph's brothers come down into Egypt because they hear that there's food there during the famine, and there's grain. So they come into Egypt not knowing that Joseph was their brother who was in second command. At one point, Joseph finally reveals himself to his brothers, and he says, "It's me. I'm your brother, the one you sold into slavery. What you meant for harm, God meant for good. And because of this, God has preserved our people." So that was part 1 of Joseph's restoration. Part 2 of Joseph's restoration was when his father and whole family, all of them, came to be with Joseph in Egypt and to migrate and to live in Egypt, in a place in Egypt that they would be very well taken care of. So Joseph sees restoration part 1 with the brothers and part 2 with the whole family in Egypt. Also, we see at this point that Joseph's dreams that God gave him are fulfilled, that his brothers and his parents actually do bow to him one day. Although that wasn't Joseph's heart, he was following the Lord. So when we find ourselves in these places in life, ups and downs, twists and turns, when we look around and we see things are not lining up with what God has spoken to us in his word or in our hearts individually, it's very important that we keep our hearts turned towards God and stay focused on him and look for his direction, because he is the one who has written it, and he is the one who has spoken it, and he is the one who will fulfill it. We just need to keep our face and our eyes and our hearts turned towards the Father.